Good afternoon. So you're still enjoying Ignite after one day of sessions and keynotes. My name is Roel Schellens. I'm an architect within Microsoft. I am responsible for a lot of the early deployment programs, helping customers deploying at the moment Windows 10. But I have also been an architect in the Windows Phone 8.1 early deployment program. And I'm also a TAP buddy for a lot of TAP customers out there. And we have quite a lot, I believe, more than 150 TAP customers this round. So I have about 10 customers that I need to cover. And that has given us a lot of experience. And that experience is something that I would like to share with you today. So one thing that we have noticed is that often, after the salesperson is gone, your manager tells you, well, that was a really cool device and that was a really cool demo. So let's buy those devices and let's connect them to our infrastructure. And in most cases, the clicker wasn't working. That is where you come in the picture. So your manager tells you that and you basically ask, well, that is fine, but which infrastructure? Because if you start deploying mobile devices, it often requires a very different type of infrastructure. So you're all familiar probably with the MDM solutions out there, but MDM is just one part of that entire mobile infrastructure that is required. So that is a big part of it, but things that also need to change, and I'll get to that in a second, is maybe your security policies, etc., are conflicting what mobile requires. So there are many things that need to be done. I've set up a list of 10 steps, as the title of the session suggests. There are, of course, many more, but these are the 10 steps that I want to share with you. I go not in too much detail, but I have a lot of references to sessions that go in all that detail, because it's simply impossible to go in detail in all of those areas. There is so much to talk about, and a lot of it is also new for a lot of organizations because they need new infrastructure. So I recommend you to go to those sessions. So this session is more to prepare and set up your solution for mobility. And the other session that we also have is diving much more in the operating of the solution. And that's a session I do tomorrow with Summit from the Intune product group. So as we are early deployment program, we work very closely with the engineering and the product groups to make sure that everything that we implement that the customers are requesting is aligned with what they are building. And in that session, we do all the demos. It's simply impossible to do demos when we go through all this content and also do that. There will be really cool demos out in that session because we use very early code that they are using internally. So you get an impression about what is coming from a Windows 10 mobile perspective. So some assumptions that I sort of assume when I go into this deck is that there is a basic understanding of Windows 10, so I hope you did read some about it, especially all the new capabilities. You know, there is a lot of focus on security in Windows 10, and there is a lot of focus on mobile. So you see that very much of the new features that are going to be supported in Windows 10 will be supported through MDM-like capabilities. So no group policies anymore. So you can still use it because there will be interfaces, and I'll go into that. But everything is moving to that mobile world, even the computers that you have on-prem that are in your network. So, not so much that those PCs that are on a desk become mobile, but the way that they are managed and the way they are operated. So the supporting infrastructure I'm talking about here is mainly Microsoft technology, but everything I will talk about can also apply to other MDMs or other PKI infrastructures, but because I'm a Microsoft person, it's just most simple for me to talk about Microsoft solution. But it will also apply to the Airwatch, the Mobile Irons, the Verizon, Unicert, PKI, etc. So another thing that is important is we do have lessons learned. The products are still being developed, so there are still changes going on in the product. And a lot of the capabilities that we are currently implementing with large customers are for the first time that we implement them. So it could be that today's best practices that I'm talking about will not be tomorrow's best practices. So also be aware of that, but at least it gives you a good jump start. So quickly about those early deployment programs. So we have the TAP, which is not really an early deployment program because that's where we really are starting to validate features that engineering is building with enterprise customers to make sure that they are building what enterprise customers need. So that's the Windows 10 technology adoption program. That's where I'm a TAP buddy or a program manager, however you want to call it, in that program. And there is another program that basically aligns with that program, and it's called First Wave. And I'm not sure if someone has heard of First Wave, but First Wave is really the program where Microsoft start investing really deep with customers to make sure that they build market-moving scenarios where other verticals in the market look at and say, that is a cool scenario, that's what I want as well. So I'm not sure if you've seen the case studies about Westpac, Emirates, you can all download them online, but those are some of the case studies that came out of First Wave. And that's where I'm an architect/DPM technical program manager in as well. So that's where we base all this experience on about what I'm going to tell you today. So 10 steps. We came up with 10 before I knew what the 10 steps were. So like I said, there will probably be more, or you could split some of them, but just at a high level. The number one is really important, secure a sponsor, and the first two are not really technical, but I quickly go through it. I'm not going to bother you with you too much because it's not technical, and I assume we have a technical audience here, but those things are really important, and as well as the number two, agree on requirements. Set up a test environment, so I've got some references there, we've set something up, and I'll share that with you as well. Make sure your public key infrastructure is ready. This was the number one blocker or the number one most complex activity that most organizations from the previous programs run into. Ensure the identity solution supports mobile. A lot of organizations don't really realize that mobile also means that the device is not always connected to their environment. So you need an identity solution that fits with that. Learn and prep your mobile device management solution. So I know that we all know today mobile device management, you go into the console and you set your configuration items. What you now will see is this is becoming more and more important. And you as the expert now also need to understand what that really means. What means SyncML? What does mean configuration service providers? What does mean OMA URI? All those things, that is where the world is moving to. Not only for Microsoft, also for all the other MDMs. So, protect your data. One of the hot topics when we come into customers and they say, okay, I'm going to provide this application to users, but it has sensitive data. How do I make sure that that sensitive data is not shared with other applications or that it can leak out of my organization? Number 9, allow work from anywhere, from any device. Very much related to VPN-like solutions, reverse proxy-like solutions. So something that organizations need as well. And make your application mobile and manageable. This is often what especially the executives in organizations really worry about, because this is enabling those business processes to become mobile. For whoever has a great story around any of those 10 steps that I just mentioned, around Windows Mobile, we've got this Nokia Lumia 930 on the desk, and at the end of the presentation, please remind me to remember it, because I didn't put a slide at the end of the presentation for this, but we will hand out this Lumia for that person. So secure sponsor. I'll go through this very quickly, but why do you need a sponsor for these type of solutions? Like I said, these type of solutions are very new for a lot of organizations and require a lot of changes. Without an executive sponsor, it's most likely very difficult for you that when you need additional resources, and you will need them most likely because mobility touches every single area in IT, that it will be very hard to get them. The other thing is escalations. You need to escalate at some point things that conflict with current policies or anything that is not standard today. So you need an executive sponsor to help you with that. And the other thing is, like I said, you will have new standards and policies. You need to prepare the organization that they will most likely require to do that. How to find it? Who will profit most? So look in your organization who will profit most and make sure that that person supports you from those mobile scenarios. Show the business values to these people. Don't show how cool something is, because they often get very not interested anymore if you have those conversations with them. And come well prepared. So make sure that you have a good story in their language. So agree on the requirements. Very quickly, there are two types of requirements. The first type of requirements you should start with are your business requirements. And you should agree them with the business. So define the end goal, and the end goal in most cases is not technical. If you've defined an end goal that is technical in your organization, it is very hard to get additional budget because it's the business often that steers that budget decision, and it's very hard to get justification for your project. Quantify those requirements even if they are business requirements. Examples: improve acceptance by, or improve productivity through. So make sure that it is somehow quantifiable even for business requirements. And structure requirements, so start with the persona and the scenarios and the processes that that persona is using, and that will really clarify what the scope should be of your solution that you will be building. So that later on they cannot come to you, but we also like, or this person also likes, is that a person that falls within the scope of the personas that we identified? Yes, no, then it's not in scope. So if it's not in scope, we need to escalate and get additional budget, etc. So it's very important to do that from the start of the project. So also ask IT for their non-functional mobility needs. Create a common understanding about what mobility is. Many people have different perceptions on mobility, so make sure that everyone is on the same page when you start. Agree on the end goal, and the end goal should always be what the business needs, because then you get that support from above again, so that is really important. Give them predefined questionnaires and requirement lists so that they don't have to invent them themselves, because that will be a never-ending story if you start doing that. And quantify your requirements again, just like you did for the executives. And then structure your requirements, but that's very straightforward. So that's about the process and the not so technical stuff. Let's go more technical. So the first thing that, when you have all organized those first two steps, make sure you start building a test environment so that you understand when people ask, this is what I want, and you can then translate that to how that works in a technical way. So the other thing that you want to do is, okay, I want to make sure that they define something or they have a requirement that is realistic, that it realistically can be done. And you can then also say, okay, this is how I interpret your requirement. Is that correct? So this is what really happens. So you give them a device and you show them, and then you have a checkbox. So it's really important that you have a test environment. It can be very simple and straightforward, and I'll get to one that we, at least that I'm going to blog about. Education. So for yourself, but everyone in the team, this is really important that when you do this for the first time, when you go in production, in most cases you will do something wrong and it will affect the end user, and it doesn't look good on you and the project. So that brings me to point 4, that's build your own enterprise mobility lab. Internally within Microsoft, I've written a plus 200-page guide to write a complete enterprise mobility solution from end to finish, from setting up your Azure AD, federation, self-service identity, publishing SharePoint, the MDM, everything you can think of, the NDS, the certificate environment, I've put it in there. So I can't just send that guide to everyone. So we've decided that we set up a blog. But basically what the guide is providing is, at this point in time, it provides 2 types of environments that you can build. The one is an Intune-only environment, so that is just an MDM standalone environment, but with all the other supporting infrastructure and solutions around it. And we kept it really simple, because that's the goal, just to do your initial discovery with MDM. And the second one is the hybrid setup, where we have Config Manager and Intune integrated, but all the other scenarios around it, of course, they work very similar and identical. The only difference is that you have Config Manager in the right setup. The other thing that we do is we make sure that you don't have to invest too much to build this. So in the guide, they build that on the left hand, the DC, the NDES, and the WAP in an IaaS environment in Azure, so that you don't need physical boxes, etc. So you can just build it and simulate your on-prem solution. And the same applies to the right-hand picture. There are only 2 investments you have to do, and that is you need a certificate. So you need to buy a public certificate so that you can use that to do ADFS federation, and you need to buy a public domain name. So those would be the only investments you would have to make to build this. And if you already have an Azure IaaS solution, then you could utilize that. Otherwise, if you have an MSDN solution, everyone with an MSDN solution has the right to monthly Azure credits, so you could run VMs based on those credits. That's also why we kept the number of servers to a minimum. But in a real production environment, you of course have many more, because you saw the DC, but actually the DC is the DC, the CA, it's the ADFS server, it is the AD sync server, so it has many more roles than you normally would have in a production environment. So the blog series just went live, so if you want to have a look at it, the link is in the deck, so the blue letters is the blog. The blog series comes from, I'm not sure if you know the deployment guys, so they are my team within Microsoft, and well, the people that really moved more to the mobility space said we're going to create a new blog because deployment is not really what you do with mobility, so we create a new blog called Mobility Guys. We've published the first 2 blogs last week, so it's just an introduction and the announcement for the blog series that I'm going to blog about, and that will just set up that Intune-only setup. So it's not setting up Intune, just let me make that clear. It is you go and register all your prerequisites for build your own enterprise mobility lab. You set up and configure the on-prem identity infrastructure in Microsoft Azure AD. So you need to set up Azure AD, set up web application proxy to do the reverse proxying and do the federation for ADFS, set up and configure the identity synchronization because you want to make sure that the identities are synchronized, AAD Premium and Office 365 because we want to have that whole spectrum on what you can do, and Office 365 really shows the added value of mobility, and you really want your Office applications to be mobile as well. And set up and configure mobile device management with Intune, it's the next step, and then we go and set up the certificate solution. So that's where I want to refer to if you want to build a quick end-to-end mobility solution with most of the components that you would need if you build a full enterprise ready solution. So the next step that I want to talk about is the make sure your public key infrastructure supports mobile. Like I said before, this was the area where most of the early deployment or the early adoption customers were struggling with most, because it's not only a new concept, mobility, but the way you manage and enroll certificates in a mobile environment is very different as how you do it in a normal desktop type of environment. So it is also something that the current solutions out there, well, by now they are ready, and they learned from their first iteration of implementing a solution for this. But the first solutions out there, and I'm talking about 1.5 years ago or so, they were not always working with all the different products. So we worked together with MobileIron, AirWatch, with whoever the customer was using. And they also didn't have all the... sometimes there were just bugs in the solution because the product wasn't tested against that other solution. So it was all new for everyone, so everyone was learning. So why public key is so important? So like I said, security for mobile solutions equals PKI. So if you are becoming a mobility expert, you need to learn PKI. You don't have Kerberos, you don't have domain join in a mobile environment, and you still need to provide even a more secure solution as you would do on-prem, because all those devices with your sensitive data and your sensitive identities are out there. If you don't do it right, you don't have control over it, and you want to have control over that. So you need a different solution as what you currently use with a domain join-like solution, with the TGTs, the ticket renting tickets that are distributed to get access to resources. And that is in mobile world certificates. Again, not only for Microsoft, it's just a generally accepted solution to provide secure identity and secure encryption and security in general. So the features that mobile solutions use, they use in the majority PKI to secure them. Like I said, we worked a lot with third-party PKIs. Not all the vendors did test against each other, so we ran into a lot of bugs. We fixed them. So we also fixed them when we, for example, were working on Windows Phone 8.1, immediately at that time it was still called Threshold. So I was working with the sustained engineering, which is building service packs and all those type of updates for existing product, as well as with engineering who were building the new products that were coming. And the fixes were just implemented in both solutions. So Windows 10 today already has all the fixes that we run into when we were deploying Windows Phone 8.1. So that is very positive. And like I said, you need it for many applications, and the protocol that is used to manage certificate is called the Simple Certificate Enrollment Protocol, not to be confused with System Center Endpoint Protection. It's a protocol, and I'll talk about it a little bit further, that was actually built to deploy certificates to network devices about 10 years ago. The new thing in Windows 10, and that was more a learning, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well, is direct certificate enrollment. So I'll talk about it in the next slide. So, oops. What is SCAP? So, like I said, it is a protocol that was developed about 10 years ago for routers and switches to enroll X509 certificates from a certificate authority. So, it is today a generally used protocol for all MDMs out there and all devices out there, at least the Windows devices, the iOS devices, Android devices, are all using the SCAP protocol to get certificate managed. Please remember that a standard implementation of SCAP is not considered secure. So if you implement SCAP in the way as it is designed 10 years ago to deploy those certificates to devices, you could impersonate someone that you not are. So let's say I impersonate the CIO, and I say, I need a certificate. Here you have one. That's what SCAP is doing. And that is the big spoofing risk that today exists with a lot of the devices and SCAP solutions out there. So Microsoft has implemented a different solution for that. So with Microsoft, the request of the certificate is being validated. So you can only get that certificate if you can present the challenge that you got when you got the profile of the SCAP profile, or the certificate profile that you need to enroll. So I'll have an animation about that. And the other thing that is important to understand is that a certificate enrolled with SCAP, at least on the Microsoft platform, generates the private key on the device. And that is very important because that also made us develop that other deployment solution, what I was talking about earlier, just direct certificate deployment. Because if you generate the private key on the device, you cannot use it for S/MIME encryption. And I'll talk about that in a second. So let's look at the flow of how a SCAP deployment works in an Intune only solution. So not Intune and Config Manager, that works slightly different. The Config Manager solution is also in the deck, but I just have hidden it, but it works similar, but then you have the Config Manager server there as well. So this is the lab. I'll just start with the lab as we have it, but I'll just remove the servers that are not in play when we start enrolling a certificate. So the first thing that happens is when we start enrolling a certificate is that a certificate root, basically your root CA is deployed to the device. And you don't have to do that in a very secure way because the root CA is only telling the device, well, if you get certificates that are based on this CA, then trust them. So basically all your devices in your environment get it, the same thing, so it's not something that you have to challenge. So the second step is to deploy the certificate profile. And the certificate profile is just containing a lot of information about this is where you can get your certificate or request your certificate. And it also contains a challenge. So this is the proof that the device will have that the certificate profile really came from your MDM, so there can be no one in between to impersonate, well, I'm this person or I'm this device. So like I said, it contains a URI, and with that URI, it goes to the NDES server. The NDES server is your SCAP proxy. With a lot of other PKI vendors, they call it SCAP proxy. In the Microsoft PKI solution, it's called an NDES server. That NDES server then gets the challenge presented, and that challenge is then validated with the Intune solution in this case. But if you would use a Config Manager environment, it would validate it with the Config Manager environment. So if the challenge is validated, it will get the certificate, provide it to the device, and then the device gets the certificate, and the private key pair is generated on the device. And that's how we make the SCAP implementation secure. So if you wouldn't have that challenge, as what I was just explaining there, then you had the spoofing risk that those, I put some links in the previous slide where Gartner and CERT are concerned about. Challenges and solutions for certificate and how we have solved them for Windows 10. So if you have a non-Microsoft PKI environment, in the beginning when we started enrolling Windows Phone 8.1, we often run into bugs. They have now been solved in Windows 10, so it should now work much better as how it used to be in the early days. And yeah, early days is just 1 year ago or so, so it's really going quick in mobile. The NDES server was also a problem because in the early days, we could only place the NDES server in the DMZ because the device needs to have access to the NDES server to request a certificate. And that was a problem for two reasons. First of all, because it was in the DMZ, and you don't want to expose a server that really enrolls certificates in a DMZ because it contains very well, it's not sent, but it is information that could be misused by hackers. And the secondly is when we deployed this, it could only be deployed, when we were working on this, it could only deployed on 2012 R2. And at that time, 2012 R2 was very new for a lot of organizations. They hadn't certified it yet for their on-prem solutions, let alone for putting it in a DMZ. So most of the large enterprises had problems with that. So we now have a hardening guide, and basically what the guide shows you is how to place that NDES server internal and publish it through a reverse proxy, like the web application proxy. The other challenge that we run into is S/MIME encryption. I spoke about that earlier. Because the private key is generated on the device and configured as non-exportable, we cannot use that key on another device, because we cannot get it off the device, to encrypt email. So if we encrypt, if I want to unencrypt an email and I do it on this device and I want to use another device, I cannot get to that key. That is my key, but it is non-exportable. So that's why we in Windows 10 have developed another solution to deploy certificate. It is based on the PFX way of deploying certificate, but it will be completely agnostic for the end user. So we can now with the MDM, and the other MDM solutions will do that as well, because it's just a standard that we're working on with all the other MDMs as well, to push that certificate to the device so that the user now can have the same certificate on multiple devices to unencrypt email and do the S/MIME encryption. The other new component in Windows 10, and I'll talk about that more in a second, is Passport for Work. Passport, not sure who's familiar with that, but that's the new identity solution in Windows 10 that comes out of the box with multi-factor authentication. And what we can configure Passport for, and this is why I say that, is that you can configure Passport in such a way that you can say, okay, if you have a solution that requires virtual smart cards, so requires certificate, you can use the Passport certificate. So Passport also is based on SCAP. So if I want to deploy certificates, then for Passport, I need SCAP as well. So that's why I want to mention that if you want to use Passport and you don't want to be using the key pair, but a certificate implementation, you would need a certificate infrastructure as well. The other thing that customer often said is because mobile devices don't, so especially if you look at Windows Mobile, you don't have as rich user interface as you would have for Windows 10 desktop, where you have certificate manager and all those things. So we didn't really have anything on Windows, at the time Windows Phone 8.1, to look at, is the certificate deployed and which certificate is deployed? What are the properties of the certificate? Is it all correctly configured? So we now have a solution built, and it's in the store. It works on Windows Phone 8.1 as well as on Windows Mobile 10. And that's the certificate manager. So you now can see which certificates are on the phone and what the properties are of those certificates. So the next step that organizations really are struggling with, especially if you... So there are two types of organizations. You have the organizations that already have made the move by going to Office 365. And there it's often much easier because there is already an Azure AD in the background that is being used to manage the Office 365 environment. And you have the customers that want to keep everything on-prem. So also in the Windows 10 timeframe, and this will also be a combination of Windows 10 and the next version of Windows Server, we now also make it possible to satisfy those customers that want to keep everything on-prem. But because Windows Server vNext is released a bit later, to do that from an identity perspective, that has to wait as well. So the identity challenges that we've run into most of the time is that the identity needs to be accessible outside of your IT environment. So if you have a mobile device, the nature of mobile means that it can be anywhere. So that identity preferable needs to be accessible from the internet, because that is the network that is available everywhere. The other piece of feedback that we got, and that was not only related to mobile solutions, but also to in the Windows 8.1 timeframe, is MSA accounts. MSA accounts are Microsoft accounts like Live accounts and Outlook.com accounts, and they are used to get access to the store, and organizations don't like them because they don't have control over them. They are personal accounts and they cannot be managed, so they don't have control over them. So that's why we needed a different solution there as well. The other thing is that if you have a phone and you need to type in a complex password, it's not a very user-friendly exercise. So that's not going to work very well from a user adoption perspective. So that had to be solved as well in Windows 10. And also today, if you look at all the security threats out there, passwords are not considered secure anymore. If you see how many environments are hacked, and one of the most feared one is the pass the hash attack. That attack is very much based on the use of passwords, where the hash is basically captured and reused in other machines. If you are looking at an identity solution, from a Microsoft perspective, and I think this would also translate to many of the other solutions, but you really have three options. Or you build everything in the cloud. And if you have a solution that is very isolated from your environment, and we have quite a few of them out there that will be set up maybe for an event or whatever, maybe a cloud solution only would be sufficient. That would also be the most simple solution to implement from a mobile solution. So the other one that we have is, okay, I already have an Active Directory, and majority of customers out there have Active Directory. I now also want to make this identity available in the cloud, so I'm going to sync both of them, and you can then also choose to sync the password if you like to. That's optional. So that is the middle one, synchronized identity. The other one is one that I see currently implemented with the most larger enterprise customers more and more often, and that's the federated one. And the federated one really allows you to provide better application access to on-prem as well as cloud applications. So you basically say, okay, the identity in the cloud, I trust that identity to access these resources. So that is the federated solution. And that's also where you don't have to sync the passwords, because in some organizations that is an issue as well. They don't want to store them in the cloud. On top of that, an identity is not sufficient for most organizations. So the other thing you need to start looking at is, okay, I need a way to do multi-factor authentication. And I already spoke about Passport, so I'll talk about that in a second. But if you start using one of those two solutions that were in the two first solutions using Azure, then Azure comes with multi-factor authentication as well. So there is a mobile app that I could use to do multi-factor authentication, where I have a PIN that I need to type in as well next to my password, or I can get a phone call or an SMS message. That's all integrated in Azure out of the box. So the only thing that Azure then need to know, of course, is your mobile number, but it works really, really well. So you could use with multi-factor any of those three options. So something you know, it could be a password or a PIN, something you have, a phone, credit card, or a hardware token, or something you are. So fingerprint, facial recognition, iris scan, so that's something you are. So choose any of two of them, and then you have a multi-factor authentication solution. So that something you are is something that is now coming new in Windows 10. And that's what we call Windows Hello. So we announced that a while ago. But basically it is unlocking the device through using fingerprint reader, and facial recognition scan, or an iris scan. And I believe if you look at the build presentations last week, they did some really cool demos on it. And it is really as simple as standing in front of your camera, it recognizes you, and you're unlocked in your screen. You will see this coming to mobile devices more and more as well, because it makes sense, because like I said earlier, using passwords is not a very user-friendly way of unlocking mobile devices. So the false acceptance rate is very low. The false rejection rate is because you could say, okay, we just reject everything, and then it has a very high false acceptance rate. But that doesn't work, of course, so that is low as well. There is no personal identifiable data is stored anywhere. So what is basically being done, it is, if you do a fingerprint reader, it makes a scan of it and it translates that into something. It locks it through the TPM on the device. So there is no personal identifiable information anywhere, and it even doesn't store it in your Active Directory or Azure AD, or it all stays on the device and is very secured, protected by a TPM. So there's no one who could get access to that. It also has some anti-spoofing detection, so it has shown 3 here. So if you want to put a photo in front of the camera, it wouldn't work. If you have a Lumia device that you put in front of it, it wouldn't work, because that is basically what the camera would see what you see on the left-hand side. And again, Windows Hello is managed through MDM. So managed through CSPs, and I'll get to that in a second. And this is why I'm saying this is probably a feature that you might want to use at some point on your on-prem environment as well. And then you still need to look at those new mobile technologies to get those solutions working. But we have solutions for that in place. Yes, question? Sorry?
So when you're using like Hello or NPM,
yeah.
Wouldn't I get a token as well to do a lot of tasks that has a time? Doesn't it create a hash while logging in?
No, so the question is, if you use Windows Hello, wouldn't create that another token that you could then use with pass the hash again? And the answer to that is no. We will see in the next slide that Hello really works together with Passport. And with Passport, basically what happens is that if you have, even if you would have the PIN or the token that you have for the iris scan or whatever you're using to log on, you would still only be able to log on to that device only, and no other device, because it's protected by the TPM on that device. And even if I go to another device, that token would look very different. So it's not. That's why this solution is there to prevent pass the hash attacks in the future. So talking about Passport, so if you don't have a bioscanner on the device, you can also use a PIN to do the unlocking of a device. And then still the same thing applies as what I was just saying, so you can just unlock, and that's probably what some of you are already using with virtual smart cards or other solutions, is unlock the machine with a PIN instead of a passport. And especially for mobile devices, that's much more friendly to the end user and more secure as a password. So to IT, it's familiar because it's an asymmetrical key pair of certificates, and most organizations are using certificates. To the user, it's familiar because if you use a solution like Hello or PIN, it's much more friendly than using a complex password. Choice of identity provider. So I'm not sure if you heard of the FIDO Alliance, but the FIDO Alliance is a group of people that are setting up the standard around this in the industry, and organizations like Amazon, Google, Samsung, they're all part of that alliance. So they make sure that whatever is implemented can be used in all those other environments as well. Why is that so important? There will also be a passport solution on Windows 10 for consumers. So that is, of course, key-based, but if you then have that solution and you want to log on to your bank or whatever consumer application you can imagine, you have a much more secure way of authenticating. And if then your identity is stolen, and that's what you now see in the press so often, the certificate or the smart card, the credit card information is stolen, that then becomes a lot more difficult if you have a solution like that, also for consumers. And like I said, the private key is never shared, it's stored on the device, and this is why pass-the-hash wouldn't work, because you really need the device itself, and you need the person's thumb or iris or face to unlock it. So the deployment requirements for Passport, and I'm not going in too deep because I could also show diagrams, but like I said, the time is restricted on what I can talk about today. But a lot of customers ask, okay, that's really cool, Microsoft, so how can I implement that? Especially for mobile devices, of course, because that's what we are talking about. So I think the battery of this thing is almost gone. The way you can implement Passport is in two different ways. So I see it's still called NGC here, that's Next Generation Credentials. That's what we called it before, we called it Passport. But you can do key-based. So for organizations that don't have a PKI infrastructure, or even if you have a PKI infrastructure and you don't want to use it, there is an alternative way of using Passport as well. And that's where you can then say, okay, I'm going to do key-based authentication. It's maybe a bit less secure, but it is still a way to get Passport going. And especially for consumers, that is, of course, the way to go, because you cannot set up PKI environments for consumer solutions. The other one is certificate-based, and that is what I expect most enterprises will start using, because it provides the highest level of security, and you can utilize your existing SCAP implementation that you would also use for all the other solutions that I was talking about earlier to deploy your Passport certificates as well, and enroll them and manage them. So if you would have, and this is those three identity solutions that I was talking about earlier. So if you would have Azure AD only, the only thing that you would need if you do key-based is your Azure AD. So you could already implement Passport, and if you do this, so everyone here can ask for a trial subscription on Azure and start enrolling your Windows 10 device in it through an Azure domain join. And what you then see is the Passport kicks in immediately. It's already in the latest technical preview builds, and you need to provide a PIN, and you need to prove that you are who you are. So there is some things that will happen. And after that, you can then always log on with that PIN. But the policies, of course, that will be configurable to Intune. So if you use certificate-based with Azure AD, then you need Intune to configure those policies. And you need a PKI infrastructure, because Azure AD doesn't come with PKI out of the box. If you have a hybrid solution, what needs to happen is that if you Azure AD join to your Azure AD environment, you still want to be able, with those mobile devices, to access resources on-prem. So basically what is happening is that you get a token from Azure or a ticket, and that is synchronized back to your on-prem environment. And then with those mobile devices, and you configure that, of course, it's completely configurable what you can and cannot access, you can then also have access to solutions on-prem. For that, you need Azure AD sync with Passport, key write back. I'm not sure if that is already released, but that is something that definitely in the making. Azure AD subscription for certificate-based. If you choose certificate-based, you need your Active, so you always need that for the two left scenarios. You need a PKI infrastructure as well, of course, and you can do it with SCCM and Intune. Not 100% if it's going to be called Config Manager 2015, but you get my point. It's the next version of Config Manager. AD on-prem is something, and this is what I was talking about at the start of this presentation, is something where you will have to wait for till server 2000, server vNext will come out. And the main reason for that is that we need to do something on the ADFS side to make sure that the identity, the devices can be registered, etc., in the right way to get access with Passport solution. Good. So a lot of things we need to work about. So we're almost halfway. So a lot of the next, especially the ones on the end, I'm not going in that deep. One that I still want to go in quite deep is learn and prep for mobile device management, MDM solutions. If you are going mobile, this is really what you want to be an expert in if you start managing Windows 10, but also iOS, Android solutions, because they all use the same technology behind the screens. So first of all, what has changed in Windows 10? So where in the Windows 8.1 timeframe we already had an MDM solution in place where we supported a number of settings that could be configured. On Windows Phone 8.1 we had some more than on Windows 8.1, but the investment at this point in time in Windows 10 is really in this area. A lot of the features and capabilities, like I said earlier, the new features and capabilities, you might only see them in the MDM way of not MDM, but the OMADM way of managing it. And OMADM is the new way of connecting to MDM clients. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But you see that we now have a big investment, and we also have made both platforms, and the name is actually wrong. It shouldn't say phone, it should say mobile, because Windows 10, we have Windows 10 Mobile, and that is used on small tablets, phones, IoT-like devices, and we have Windows Desktop. That's the full version that you probably also running on your laptop. You see that the settings that you can set on both devices are now made at the same level, and the settings itself are the same as well. Where in the previous Windows 8.1 timeframe, if you wanted to set a specific setting on one device, you could have to use a different setting or configuration service provider as with the other platform. So they've made that identical as well. So if you have a cool story, go to the mic and talk about it.
One of the cool things about the latest version of Windows and Windows Phone is with the surfaces, you've got the touch interface. I work at a community college where we've got students that are anywhere from 18 to 80 with all varying degrees of technical skills. But we also work a lot with the elderly and the special needs, and to have the ability for them to be able to touch a screen versus try to manipulate a mouse and a keyboard makes things so much easier. But the nice thing about Windows Phone is once they've configured the surface to look a certain way, like when you first log into Windows Phone, it brings over your desktop picture and that kind of stuff. You can make them look identical. And with Continuum coming up, that's one of the things that we're really looking forward to, because they can go from one to the other and have that familiarity between the two devices.
Yeah. So does everyone know what Continuum is? Yeah. Seen it in, I think it was in the keynote as well.
So that's one of the things that we're really looking forward to. And one of the nice things that allowed us to sell it to management and to the board of directors and things is, unlike Android or iOS, Windows is easy to deploy, it's easy to manage, it's scalable. So if, someone were to lose a device, it's great to be able to, especially for Windows Phone, that you can take any user and say, well, log into windowsphone.com and click on the locate button. Okay, that doesn't help you, it's in your house someplace. Hit the ring button, and it'll ring until they find it. And it's amazing how many people use that feature. I mean, I use that, but the elderly and the special needs people use it a lot more. And sometimes I get phone calls at home in the middle of the night going, how do I find it again? And it's been pretty cool just from that. Those little features like that have made things an awful lot easier.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, there is a new CSP as well in Windows 10 that allows you to get back the latitude and altitude of the phone so that you know where the phones are, wherever they are. So that's, there are really a lot of new cool features. You made it very difficult for your other people to have a good story. If you have a good story, just talk about it, and at the end we'll all decide who wins the phone.
I have a story. We work really closely with a small hotel group in Latin America. It's called Eurobuilding Hotel Group. They have like 5 hotels in Venezuela, 1 in Buenos Aires and 1 in Miami. But in Latin America, it's kind of complicated to do, well, particularly in Venezuela, it's kind of complicated to do like a quick check-in, a quick check-out, because they ask for, the government asks for a whole lot of information. So a couple of years ago, we started using Surface to put people in the lobby, and they like quickly filled out the forms for the people in line, so they could, quickly check in and check out faster. And then they saw that worked, and they wanted to take it like a step further. And we made a kiosk out of that.
Yeah.
The difficult thing about that was the physical printers. So we did a client server app, so we could send the invoice to the printer through the server and print it in the someplace else, not in the kiosk. And right now, what we're doing is with continuity and the new features in Windows 10 is develop one single app for everything. So you can do a check-in, check-out through the phone. And,
that's a modern app, I assume.
Yeah. And we're still on the development phase. And so we have one experience for the kiosk, for the quick check-in, check-out, and for the customer on their phones. And the next step, it's a future, we're still in the investigating phase. It's use the phone as a key.
Very, very cool, yeah. So you touch on an important point. So when we often talk about mobile, we don't talk about phone only. It's also tablets, and it could be even a laptop, as long as it is mobile. And like I showed you earlier, they can now be managed in the same way, with the same settings and the same configuration. So quickly looking at the architecture about how to manage those devices. So we have, of course, the MDM client, which is now available in any Windows. Well, it was already available in Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1, but it is now also available in any Windows 10 device. MDM management is the agent that really talks with the common device configurator on the device, and that is your interface with the other ways of communicating. So you could, for example, say, well, there is a provisioning engine, but Exchange Active Sync is something that a lot of MDM, you would not always classify that as an MDM, but it has a lot of settings that you could configure there, a huge install base, and something new in Windows 10, or at least on the PC platform, is the WMI provider. And that is what I was talking about earlier. This is the way that how, for example, a config manager client that is managed in the traditional way can still access those CSPs. So the traditional laptop or whatever could still configure a configuration service provider, which you can compare with, for example, what group policies are in Active Directory, and configure them through the common device configurator. So, question.
So with all of these ways that you can configure, so you have config manager, you have MDM, you have Exchange Active Sync, how do we handle conflicting settings?
So in Windows 10, the most restrictive setting will always be configured on that device. That is the way it is implemented. So quickly going through, the question was, with all these different interfaces and ways of managing devices, how can we make sure that when we have conflicting devices or conflicting settings, that the right setting is chosen, and we always choose the most restrictive one. So a configuration service provider, a CSP, is an interface to read, set, modify, delete, or configure settings on a device. Every MDM out there that uses OMADM is using that. Those files that are pushed to devices are called syncml. And I have another picture here, how that looks like. For example, if you have an MDM, let's say Intune, it could be Mobile Iron, it could be AirWatch, it will push a syncml file to the device, to the MDM client, to be specific, and then the MDM client gives it to the common device configurator, and it ends up in the configuration service provider. And this is a sample tree. This is the one. So this is the one remote find CSP. There is already documentation on all these CSP on the internet, and I've links to that. But this is how it works in a mobile world. So you need to understand this concept. The main reason why you need to understand this is, in most cases, the settings can be configured through a GUI. Like here, for example, we have a sample one, and it's not intended for you to read everything on here. But what I really want to make clear is, for example, the maximum password length. Here is set to 6. And how that would look like in syncml is this piece of code. This is syncml that is sent then by Intune to the mobile device and says your minimum password length is 6. So at the top you see the device, the unique device ID. So what I put in red is really to make it more understandable. Then you have your OMA URI. So this is, I showed you that device tree or that CSP tree earlier. This is then where that location is for minimum device password length. And then you have there the data, that is the value, and that is 6. So the reason why you need to understand how this works is because with Windows as a service, you will see new features being implemented over time, and most of the MDMs might not have it already when the Windows feature is released. But most MDMs will have a way to configure OMA URIs, where you can then just put the OMA URI in the interface of the MDM that you have and push it to the device, and that works as well. So this is something I'm not going to talk about, but it shows a little bit where all the new investments are. So this is the whole life cycle of mobile device management. That's the session where we are going to talk about tomorrow. So enrollment, inventory, device configuration, and security. That's a very big one where we have a lot of new features. Application management, remote assistance, and unenrollment, where we really need to do selective unenrollment, where we are not wiping personal information, because in some countries that would even be illegal if you remove personal information. So there are 2 sessions that go deeper into this. The 2 sessions are listed below. So custom URI settings of Windows 10 devices, 2 references, what I was talking about earlier. One is the custom URI settings for Windows 10 devices. That is an article from the Intune team, so they are going to expand that over time when more will be there. So you could already start testing them today. And then you have the one on MSDN. So this is what is a little bit more technical and maybe difficult to implement, but this is going in more of those syncml type of details. While on the left one, if you are an administrator of Intune, that is something that is sufficient. So the other thing you need to think about is, okay, how am I going to provision those devices to the end user? That is something where a lot of organizations are struggling with as well. And when you think of that, you really need to look at the ways, the different type of ways that you have to enroll devices. So the first one is not really a mobile scenario, but I just wanted to mention it. That's just a computer domain join. So the traditional Active Directory domain join. You could make it mobile, but you're not really using MDM because, for example, with a VPN solution or direct access, you could still travel and have access. But the other one that is really interesting and that is new for Windows 10 is the computer joins Azure AD, and it establishes a trust. So I spoke about that earlier. That is a way of enrolling devices. So if you decide, okay, my mobile devices are going to Azure AD join, then you also decide it will be MDM managed because they are related. The other one that is there is, of course, also an Azure AD join, but that is more for bring your own type of devices, where this Azure AD join is more on UBI, so out-of-box experience. So someone buys a device from a computer store, logs on for the first time, and it will ask, is this a company device or a personal device? If the person then says company device, it will be enrolled in his or her Azure environment, of course, if he or she has the credentials. The other one is where you already have a device completely configured. You can then go into configuration settings, you go to System, About, and there you can Azure AD join. Basically what you are doing is you provide that user with access to certain resources as well. So it's something you need to understand when you start doing enrollment. It's not only about, okay, I'm enrolling it in there, but no, you need to look at those different scenarios and what will be best for your solution. So like I said, we have different options. We have Azure AD Join for company-owned, and we have Azure AD Join for personal-owned. But you could also use it. It is not enforced. You could also use the second one for company-owned devices, but it is the way it is developed at the moment and being thought of as these are the scenarios that we want to support. The other thing that is important is, okay, I'm going to give a device to the end user. Does the user need to enroll it himself and configure things on the device, or do I want to pre-provision it? So I can create a provisioning package which can be deployed through an SD or USB card, NFC, a package that the user clicks on through an email or local storage, and then that device is enrolled and completely configured in your environment as you want to. So that is new in Windows 10. So what can you provision? I'll put this just here as a reference. Typically the things that you want to have there out of the box. And for example, enrolling the device into your MDM or installing applications, creating your Wi-Fi profile so that the user immediately has access to your Wi-Fi network. So the other thing, and I'm not going to talk about very deep because this is a very complex area where they have presentations about that take 60 or 90 minutes, is protect your data. And there are really two ways of protecting your data. First of all is the way to, first of all is preventing users that have devices that you don't trust to access your data. And then when they have access to the data, ensuring that the data that they have access to is always being kept secure from if it's company-related data. So those are the two areas that most customers are most concerned about, and that is where we have built solutions for. So the first one is conditional access and health attestation. A lot of organizations ask me, okay, why do you have conditional access for iOS and Android and Intune, and why don't you have it for Windows? And that is because it is in Windows, but it is in Windows 10. So that's where we put our investment. So what will basically happen is that in traditional environments where you don't have proof that where you don't have conditional access, and the condition is that you need to prove that you are healthy, is that, okay, give me access, yeah, here you have access. And if that device doesn't comply with certain standards that you have, it needs to have the latest signatures, it needs to be up to date till a certain level, then it could be a risk for your data and the applications that are on it. So what is new in Windows 10 is that we now have the concept of making sure that the device is healthy before you are going to provide it access to your internal resources. So the MDM evaluates the health of the device, and this is all done in a way that the person that is on the device cannot spoof this and do as if it is healthy. Yes?
Does this happen every time you try to access a resource, or is it
Yeah.
something that happens once, then?
So the question is, does this happen every time when you try to access a resource? Yes, so when your device accesses a resource, it could be a week later, and there could be new signature files, or there could be new hotfixes that are being released, so we need to validate that. So the other thing that I can't talk about too much, but there is an entire session about on Thursday, is enterprise data protection. And this is what we have as our solution to prevent creating different containers with different identities and different environments. So where we had a lot of discussions about with Windows 8.1 is he said, okay, I want to create a separate container where all my business apps live and where all my identities from the corporate environment live and where all my data of the corporate environment lives. So that there can nothing be exchanged with everything that is personal on that device. And that, of course, is a very bad experience for the end user, because is Word something, or is Outlook something that is personal or corporate? So if you have a bring your own device scenario, that device is from that user, and the user is using their own Outlook from their own Office 365 environment. So it's something that we have addressed through enterprise data protection. So basically what we do is we tag the data as being enterprise, so it's then encrypted. The way we can tag it is through policies that we configure, where we say, okay, this data comes from this IP address, this data comes from these applications, this data comes from... And when that data arrives on the device, it is encrypted by default. When the data is moved from an application that is classified as corporate, shared, or personal, then we'll see, okay, is that user allowed to place it there, yes or no? If it's not, then that data cannot be shared. And I'm sure you have seen some of the demos with Twitter, where people want to copy and paste something of their email into Twitter, which is personal, and then they get, or if it's, because it's audited as well, or they get a message, are you sure, because this is a personal app, and this is corporate data, and this is all being audited. And in most cases, then users say, well, let's not do it because it is traceable. So you can configure it like that, or you can just block it. So it's up to the administrator to configure that. But basically, you can now separate corporate data and personal data, and not have the application boxed into their own containers, because that is a very bad user experience. Often it requires a proprietary email application, a proprietary file sharing application, a proprietary Internet Explorer application, so web browser application, so it's not a good user experience. So the last two ones are not too long, but I just wanted to highlight it because it is something that we worked on quite a lot with a lot of the enterprises, and that is providing remote access. And remote access is, in the mobile world, what we worked on most of the time. Two types of remote access. And, well, here it's called the web, but it's basically a reverse proxy. Some organizations don't use web, they can use any other reverse proxy. Or the VPN solution. That is used in the majority of cases where you want to provide internal access to your resources or applications by mobile devices. So the investments we have made there, and the biggest challenge from an MDM perspective in the past was always, okay, does this VPN vendor support Windows Phone 8.1, or does this VPN vendor? So we now have support from all major VPN vendors with plugins that you just download from the store. And why have we implemented like that? Because this gives the VPN vendor the option to quickly implement hotfixes, and they can enroll it within days. Where if they had to implement that as a side-loaded application or in the phone itself, it would sometimes take months. So that makes it a lot easier. The other thing is auto-connect and always-on VPN. So if there are certain criteria that you define when you say, okay, if you are on my Wi-Fi network, just always kick off the VPN connection. But if it is a hotspot, then don't use the VPN connection. So that's what you can configure with always-on and always VPN. Per app VPN will be is new in Windows 10 as well. That was, I believe, announced last week as well on build. And basically what it means is that you can configure certain applications are allowed to use a certain VPN connection. And that is where you then can secure that connection to that more secure application internally, where the Facebook app or any other app on that device are not allowed to use that VPN connection. So you can have multiple VPN connections going into your internal network. The web application proxy, what we had as a challenge there often was that if we wanted to access internal resources, we often needed to use Kerberos. And these devices were devices that didn't have Kerberos, those mobile devices. So what we have now is Passport. So that's a way to get around it. So you now should, with Windows 10, be able much easier. It's much easier to do reverse proxy type of scenarios with mobile devices. And then the last one, if my clicker works, make your application mobile and manageable. So when we are talking, especially to executives, they say, okay, I have all these business processes that I do with these applications. And if these people are mobile, I want them to be able to use these applications. And how am I going to make those applications available? And sometimes it requires, if it's an ISV application, that you need to go to the ISV and ask where they are with this, or sometimes you need to develop something yourself, or you do reverse proxy. So there are several options there. But what is also a challenge for a lot of users, okay, we have the Windows Store, we have now the Business Store in Windows 10, we have the company portal. How should I work with them all together? So you need to have a strategy and a solution there before you can go live with mobile solution. So the store is only accessible with MSAs. The Business Store is basically an interface between the store and your identities that you manage, your Azure AD identities, so that you can control what they can see, what they can install, and even if it is paid applications, you can now bulk buy applications, not only with credit cards, but also with POs, because that was a complaint of a lot of organizations as well, and then deploy them in such a way. And you can reclaim those licenses. So if you would and enroll it to an MSA account, if that user would leave, you cannot reclaim those licenses. So it's an important new solution for many organizations. And then we have the company portal itself. That's a application on the device itself. Basically what you can do is you can interface this to the Business Store and integrate those. But this is new. So the company portal is not new, but the Business Store is new based on Azure AD identities, and that is the big new component of Windows 10 that now makes it possible to much better manage applications from the store. Sorry, there's a question. Correct. The question is, so the Business Store eliminates the need for a Microsoft account, and that is correct because you now use an Azure AD account to provide access to store applications. 1 second, I'll go to the last slide and I'll go to the remaining questions. So these are some of the sessions of my team members and that are related to this topic. So managing Windows 10 or whatever Windows 10 in general. These are the links to the MDM documentation, but the link to Intune is not in here, so that's in the earlier slide. That's the block of the mobility guide, the block for the Intune team, and don't forget to review this presentation. Sorry, there was another question there.
One of the issues we run into, more primarily with iPads currently, but with the mobile device system of it, it's been really hard to push down apps. Is this something with Windows 10? There will be some sort of silent install type thing so that an admin can push apps silently to a device without any user interaction or the password?
Yes, so the question is, what are we doing to make application deployment more silent and that the user doesn't notice anything from it? Yeah, in Windows 10 you can do that through the MDM, of course, whichever MDM you are using, and you can install applications, push applications now to the user.
For the actual management of the devices, I've been hearing a lot of different things with different sessions that it's sort of muddy as to how that's going in the future. It's not, so with Server 2016, we get Azure AD on premises. So that basically leaves only Intune sitting there in the cloud, but Intune's also tied back to SCCM. So it almost sounds like they're finally, and this is kind of what we're looking for, eliminating the need to even have Intune in the cloud and be able to just use SCCM to manage.
Yeah, the question is, just quickly summarizing it because we're at the end of the time. I'll stay a little bit longer, but for additional questions. But yeah, with Config Manager next and also Server next, like you can see in some of the slides, we can now do most of this, what I was talking about, on-prem as well. So that is where we are going. Sorry, I need to stop because we're at the end of the presentation. Quick vote. We had 2 people for the phone. So you have a story as well? What about you guys come to the desk and then we'll decide what the best story was for the phone. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the week.